Welcome back. It's been nearly 22 years since America was attacked on 9/11. So is the secret war on terror working? Not everyone thinks so. California Democratic Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs serves on the House Foreign Affairs Committee Subcommittee in Africa, Global Health, and Global Human Rights. And she wrote this in December. The United States and the international community have poured billions of dollars into fighting terrorism on the continent with bleak results. Extremist violence in Africa has increased by 300% in the past decade, and violent events have doubled since 2019. So, is America's secret war on terror effective? Joining me now is former CIA Director John Brennan and counsel at the Brennan Center for Justice. A different Brennan, by the way, no relation, is Katherine Yon Ebright. Katherine, welcome. John, it's good to see you. Katherine, for some definitional, for the purpose of our conversations, how are you defining a secret war?
So I think the core of it is, first, does Congress know that hostilities are taking place on any basis, whether active and ongoing or on notionally one-off or episodic strikes, raids? The other question is, does the public know about it? And I think at base level, the public needs to know when, where, and against whom the United States is fighting. And the current authorizations that we have for the war on terror, the scope of which is defined by the president, they do not have clear limitations in terms of when, where, against whom.
John, do you have any beef with that definition?
No, I agree that there should be as much transparency as possible about our counterterrorism operations worldwide, to the extent that we don't compromise operational security. And I think administrations over the years have tried to balance the need, in fact, to be able to make sure the American public are aware in broad strokes about what's going on, while at the same time not doing anything that's going to jeopardize the security and safety of our forces.
Let me bring up I want to say recent example. It's been now 6 years because John McCain was alive then, but this was early in Trump's presidency. We had some soldiers die in Niger, and so we learned a lot about what we were doing in Niger, and Congress didn't seem to know a lot. Take a listen.
Do you feel the administration's been forthcoming up to this point about what happened there?
Of course not. We are co-equal branches of government. We should be informed at all times.
But I didn't know there was 1,000 troops in Niger.
Why haven't you been briefed? Was Jack Reed briefed?
No, I don't believe he was either. The Constitution says Congress has the power to declare war, and if you're in a long-term war, Congress ought to keep that ability.
So, John, walk me through how in Washington Congress can be briefed and not realize they've been briefed. Because I'm guessing that's probably what we're seeing here.
Well, I think there are two things. One is this took place during the Trump administration, and I think there was a real lapse in terms of the protocols and processes and procedures during that time. But there are 535 members of Congress, and not all of them are privy to the details of these types of military activities.
We highlighted there were people that you would assume, like McCain was always on Intel Committee. I think he was a standing member for that. And Schumer's the leader, so those guys
Yes, they
know.
should be kept informed, which is part of their oversight function, and it's up to the Department of Defense and related agencies to be able to make sure that the members that have that congressional oversight jurisdiction are kept fully informed. But clearly there was some type of breakdown there. But they need to be able to keep them informed. Congress establishes the legislative parameters of these activities. But once they establish it, then they need to be kept informed about what is actually happening. How many troops are going out there? What types of activities are they involved in? What type of collaboration and cooperation are they engaging in with partner forces around the globe?
Katherine, what do you think we've been too in the dark on?
So again, those core questions, when, where, against whom have we been fighting? But with respect to Niger in particular, the activities of special operations forces working, quote unquote, by, with, and through foreign partners. Those programs where we may be even commanding foreign partners, putting them on a U.S. payroll, are highly classified. Very few members of Congress are actually directly informed about this, and the information that their offices are, or rather that the Armed Services Committee is receiving, is classified at such a high level that the member offices often cannot access those notifications or reports.
Is there a success story where a secret war, I mean, we know what the general mission is, counterterrorism, but we don't know a lot about it. What's the best example of this policy working?
So I do want to push back on the premise of that, which is to say, if there's a secret war, there are not clearly articulated, publicly articulated objectives. And while in the counterterrorism context, the objective would be potentially defeating or deterring a terrorist organization that is working in that region. What the success story would be, it simply is not going to be a matter of the public record.
Right.
And moreover, in the context of the war on terror, we've had Department of Defense officials march into Congress and say that their work, quote unquote, by, with, and through foreign partners under the same authorities that are currently being used in Somalia. They'll say these are such effective authorities. We've seen, 1,000+ killer captures of various terrorists.
Right.
But then if you go and you try to FOIA information about how many terrorists have been captured or killed under these authorities, the Department of Defense will say, we actually don't collect that information.
Okay. John, answer that question. Why don't we collect that info?
Well, I think we do collect some of the information. Again, the question is what is publicly released and what needs to be kept sort of within government environments.
Right.
But I do think the ultimate metric of whether we've been successful or not is taking a look at the lack of attacks against the U.S. homeland here over the last 22 years almost. The fact that we have done such great work against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP in Yemen, the fact that we've done and dismantled most of al-Qaeda's infrastructure in Afghanistan, Pakistan, ISIS is not what it used to be because of the work in Syria and other places, and al-Shabaab has really been, contained in that area of the Horn of Africa.
Is this what success, I remember, when it first started, the language, war on terror, global war on terror, there'd be this debate, you can never win against terrorism. There's always going to be terrorism. What is that? Be careful using that phrase because you're never going to end that kind of war. Is this the best we can hope for, which is successful whack-a-mole?
Well, I think what you try to do is to reduce the prospects for these types of attacks against U.S. interests as well as against our friends, partners, and others overseas. And I think we have been successful in that. But I do think it's not just engaging in counterterrorism activities and operations. You're trying to build up the infrastructure in these countries so that they can, their intelligence, security, military services, their political system, they can rid themselves of corruption that really eats away at these systems. So this, again, is a multidimensional effort that has to take place over many, many years.
It seems like, I don't know if there's any part of the Permanent Five at the UN that doesn't have troops in Africa, right? We have somebody is dealing with some problem in Africa. What is it about? Is it just too many unstable governments? Is that why all of these al-Qaeda proxies have had such success sort of getting some inroads?
Well, I think you do end up with vicious cycles where we have had, the French have had, the Russians have had various military forces operating in Africa for the past, again, decade to 2 decades. And once you have this foreign presence, notionally trying to stabilize a country or a region, people in that region or in that country are going to look at that and say, well, why are there foreign interveners? Yeah. Why do they think that they know how we should be governed or how our security apparatus should look? Right. Why are they pouring in weapons as well into our country? And maybe we should push back against that. And so there are documented examples about how the U.S. presence in various African countries have actually spurred recruitment for terrorist organizations.
Let me ask you this, John. Is there an anchor, South Africa or Nigeria, can either one of them be the anchor countries here that could sort of lead on security, even if they can't do it all on their own?
I think they have to assume a larger role, and I think that's what the United States is hoping is going to happen. But there are a lot of the countries in Africa where there are just endemic problems that really undermine the ability of the host governments as well as external forces to be able to mitigate some of these terrorist threats. The United States doesn't want to absent itself from the continent because then we'd be ceding that ground.
We kind of have, unfortunately, and we're trying to work our way back in.
Well, at different times, I think, our presence has ebbed and flowed.
Right.
And I do think the presence in Somalia and Courtney's piece, which was very good, I think really tries to explain what the U.S. military is trying to do there, working with, I think, a government that is better than it has been in quite a while, a president who is committed to trying to address some of these interclan rivalries and issues. And so what we need to do is to be able to enable and empower some of these Somali forces to be able to assume a larger role. But it's going to take time. There's going to be some trade-offs. As Katherine said, there's some people that point to our involvement there as a reason to maintain their side of the fight. So again, this is something the administration has to grapple with.
Katherine, what's something we should look for? We know Congress wants to write a new war resolution. That obviously we know there's enough people who will accept the premise that we have to do these one-off interventions, whatever we want to call them, with special forces. What's that war resolution going to look like?
Yeah, so there are questions about, is this effective? Is this increasing stability in the African continent? Is this actually supporting the national security interests of the United States. And that's all a matter of policy, but as a matter of law, right, Congress is the part of government that holds the reins on when, where, and against whom our nation is at war. And there is a law from 1973, end of the Vietnam War, called the War Powers Resolution, that was really meant to put the reins on the president, the executive branch, which had spread the Vietnam War into Cambodia and Laos under the radar. That law, however, across administrations has been systematically dismantled, undermined, watered down. And what this movement in Congress now looks like is patching up some of those loopholes. For instance, the word hostilities was never defined in the War Powers Resolution. And so executive branch lawyers said unless it's a full-blown war, we don't need Congress's go-ahead.
John, what's your biggest concern, that the war resolution goes away with nothing that replaces it, or something is still too ambiguous?
Well, I'd like to see the executive and legislative branches work collaboratively on putting together a framework that really is going to govern our military activities and operations globally.
Period.
Period, yes. So, but there has to, again, be a recognition that the administration has to be the one to execute those policies and those activities and operations. Enabling the administration to be able to take actions against terrorist groups, working with partner forces, but again, setting limits on it so we do not get involved in a lot of secret wars that, again, members of Congress are unaware of, and the American public is also just fully unaware of. We need to have a balance of, again, transparency, but as well as some secret activities.
We also need some trust again. Public needs to trust the government. The two parties need to trust each other.
Good luck with
Congress
that.
and President need in the presidency. And that's something I think is harder than all of it. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.